Hello and welcome back to this another video lecture on Aristotle. We will continue and start with Aristotle's Politics. And today's lecture we are going to focus mainly on book 4 of Aristotle's Politics. But before we get into that and before we start with the book itself, it is quite essential for us to understand what Aristotle meant by politics. You see, what we think of politics today it's very different from his understandings of what politics is. Today's understanding of politics means very different now than what they meant in his days, right? So first of all, we have to understand this. You see, for Aristotle, you cannot, for instance, separate the essence of life with the community, right? With the community or the society in which you dwell, in which you live. And so what happens is that for them, especially if you have paid attention with regards to the lectures, we have lectures regarding Socrates and Plato, and also Aristotle. You must remember that when they speak of politics, they speak of the very essence of life. That's how you can see, that's how you can understand it. In other words, it is the very being of you, because for them society or the community in which you live is inseparable from you as a person. And that is quite rightly so if you think about it, because what you are, who you are, and what you become in the future or now, or what you are now and what you will become in the future. In other words, what you are, the kind of person that you are now and the kind of person you will be in the future, it more or less, according to them, depends upon the society in which you were brought up, in which you live. And if you just, you don't have to accept this blindly. I mean, if you just look around, the answer is quite obvious. In other words, if you are born and brought up here in India or here in Nagaland or in Assam, Manipur, wherever you are, you will embody the spirit of your community, right? In other words, the temperament, the attitude, the beliefs, norms, the customs, the traditions of your given society in which you live. And thus, the kind of person that you become, or the kind of person that you become, depends upon the kind of society in which you live. So we will get more into this later on, but for now I want you to understand that when Aristotle, or when for instance any of the Greek philosophers which we have spoken of, right, which we have learned, is that for them society is inalienable, inseparable from you as an individual. And hence, when we speak of politics, politics becomes the very essence of you. In other words, how society molds you is politics. That's the most simple way of understanding this, the what do you call it? Politics. In other words, you see, we have this understanding that by politics, we have this very wrong idea about politics, because now in most cases here in India, we translate, or even in Nagaland here, we wrongfully translate politics as city states, right? But that's not what it meant. It only meant that politics is a community, right? And the way your society molds you is politics, and how you get molded depends upon how politics is in your given society. In other words, it's the very being of you. It constructs you, right? It is the construction of you. It builds you up. The kind of society that you live in builds you up. Hence, it becomes as a society, it becomes the very essence of you, right? What you become is already embodied in the kind of society that you live in. Hence, for politics, it simply means that politics is, for instance, for Aristotle, is the society is. It is very you, the essence of you is in politics. Hence, it becomes very important for especially for these Greek philosophers, especially for Aristotle, to think of it as that there is a purpose, because for him he has this idea that everything has a purpose. and rightly so. Like, your life has a purpose, right? Things that exist, they have purpose. Maybe say, for instance, the purpose of a seed, of an apple seed. What is the purpose? The ultimate purpose is to bear apples, right? So that's the purpose of an apple seed. Much in the same way, you are, the moment that you were born here on this earth, you were born with a purpose. Whatever the purpose may be, it's for you to understand those things. So you must understand that, so Aristotle sees you as a person who has a purpose. In other words, everything that exists necessarily exists because there is a purpose to it. Hence, the whole purpose of politics is to attain happiness for Aristotle, right? Like we've discussed in the previous lecture, eudaimonia, right? But then, by happiness, I do not mean the kind of happiness that we now think of. By happiness, Aristotle meant this. It means to thrive, right? To prosper, right? To grow well, to become strong, to become healthy and vigorous, right? To be fit and flourishing. That's happiness. That's what good life ultimately meant. It did not mean the kind of good life. It did not mean the kind of happiness that we now think of, because today's idea of happiness is very shallow, right? We think that just because you have some material wealth or material gains or monetary gains, you become happy. But those kind of happiness is temporary. But for Aristotle, when he speaks of happiness, it means something enduring. It endures, it continues on, it sustains itself. And how do you sustain that sort of happiness? You sustain those happiness by thriving, right? By prospering, by blooming, as you can say, by flourishing, right? That's the ultimate goal of politics. That's not just the ultimate goal of politics, but then the society, the whole society is brought together, right? The whole society is brought together to form this political community, so that you come together for a purpose. In other words, here's the thing. For instance, very simple. In society today, especially in most democratic societies, you form group, right? You form your own association. Now, each association has their own purpose. There's a goal which those kind of associations, which each specific organization or association wants to attain, right? So, for instance, you have an association of teachers, right? So, what is the ultimate purpose of the association of teachers? Well, the whole purpose of having this association for teachers is to look after the welfare of the teachers, right? In simple ways. And you also have labor union, right? Which is also an organization or association. Now, what is the purpose of this labor organization or labor association or labor union? The purpose of the labor union is to ensure that the welfare of the laborers are taken care of, so that the laborers will not be exploited, so that they will be taken care of, their interest will be there, that the laborers will get daily wage, livable wages. So the purpose of having this association is to ensure the welfare of the labor. So much in the same way, the whole purpose for Aristotle, the purpose that every community, right? So every community or any kind of political associations, you come together and form such kind of political organization solely for some sort of benefit, right? You come together for some good, right? For some good, because ultimately, if there's no benefit to you, then why would you even form a community, right? Why would you even form, for instance, a labor union, for example, or a teachers union, or a travelers union, or a taxi union? You don't have those things. You come together so that you attain some higher good, right? some purpose to what you are doing. So much in the same way, for Aristotle, politics aims at the ultimate good, right? The ultimate good, and that ultimate good is to ensure happiness, is to ensure the good life, is to ensure the society, is to ensure and give the people in your society the good life, right? And you attain those things. Obviously, we spoke about those things last time in the last lecture, through ethics, through ethical behaviors, through virtues, right? So you need to be virtuous. Not only you, but also the leaders themselves must be virtuous and ethical and whatnot. But nevertheless, at the beginning of politics, of the whole book Politics, Aristotle goes through a very brief discussion about what politics is, or the ultimate purpose of politics. So he says that, that every community, right, every kind of community or every kind of society, they are established, right? You form communities with a view of something good, right? Because ultimately, you and I as human beings, we do things so that we do things so that we always do things or act in order to obtain which we believe will attain certain kind of benefit to us, right? In other words, our actions, our behaviors, we always do things. We form organizations, we form communities, we form associations, or we come together in the first place so that we attain something good, so that something benefits us. When Aristotle speaks of something good and something benefits you, it does not mean in a very selfish manner. It means benefit that is beneficial to all, to everybody in the society, not just you, right? So we must remember, and I would suggest that please keep in mind, when he speaks of the good, when he speaks of benefit, right? When he speaks of the welfare, he is not speaking about your selfish aim or goals or your selfish benefits, but he's speaking of the benefit for everyone, for everybody in the society, not just you alone. So please keep that in mind when we speak of the good, when we speak of benefit, right? So for Aristotle, we come together, we form these communities, we form every kind of associations or organizations, right? So that we are trying to obtain something good for ourselves, something beneficial, so that something beneficial can come out of forming such an association or organization. And community is one of them. So every community comes together because there is something good to be attained. But also, the highest stage of development, right? The highest stage of human association is the state, right? It's the city-state, it's the polis. But when we speak, again, please keep this in mind. Polis is not city-state, right? It is a very wrong, loose translation of what it actually meant. Please keep this in mind, because you will misunderstand Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato if you continue to think that polis, but the Greek term polis means city-state. It is not that, right? So for Aristotle, like every community represents a certain stage of human development, right? Human progression, right? So every kind of human organization has a certain stage, a higher level of organization. In other words, first you are an individual, and then you have, above the individual, you have the organization of family, right? You have a family, and above, and then the family is one sort of is one step above the individual. In other words, human family is an organization, right? It's a human community. But then there's a higher development of the family, and that is clans. And there's a higher development of clans, right? Organization of human organization. And above the clan would be the community, say or the village. And above the village would be the community. Above the community would be the state, the city-state, or the polis. But for Aristotle, so as with Socrates and Plato, the city-state is your being. You are being molded in that city-state. But for Aristotle, likewise, so with Plato and Socrates, the city-state, right? The city-state or the state itself, the society in which you live in, the political community, right? The political community represents the highest stage of human development, the highest stage of human development in terms of its association, in terms of its organization, right? So the highest, because the state or the political community, it is contains in it all sorts of community, right? From the individual level to the family level to the clan level to the village level to the community level to the political community itself, or the state. The city-state or the state itself, it aims at the highest good. Organizations, every sort of preliminary community aims at something good, but the state itself, the the political community aims at the highest good. And the highest good, which is the purpose of politics, is what? Is happiness. And by happiness, it just means to prosper, to flourish, to thrive, right? In other words, it is there to ensure that the persons living in that political community leads a good life, right? By happiness, when Aristotle says happiness, it just means a good life. And what is a good life? A good life is simply, right? It's simply to prosper and flourish and to thrive, right? Thrive. Those are the purpose of politics. In other words, you can see here when Aristotle speaks of politics, from the very start, he is indirectly telling us the relation between ethics and politics, right? You cannot separate the two. The whole purpose of politics can only be attained through an ethical lens, through an ethical means. You cannot attain happiness for everybody. You cannot attain the purpose of politics, which is to ensure the good life for all the citizens or all the persons living in that political community, in your society, without ethics. If there is no ethics, then politics will never attain, never achieve its purpose. And the purpose is to ensure that citizens or the persons living in your society, in your state, leads a good life. And the good life is simply not just material thing. Please remember, when Socrates, Plato and Aristotle speaks of the good life, they do not mean material, just exclusively material things. They don't mean that. Those are necessary, yes, but those are just secondary. They're not even important. What is most important is for the society to lead a good life, in a sense, an ethical life, a virtuous life, right? Where it enables people to live an ethical, virtuous, moral, and hence a good life, right? And like we spoke of in the previous lecture regarding Aristotle, the virtuous life, the ethical life is what? Is nothing but excellence, right? Excellence and living well. In other words, you excel in what you do. If you are say for instance an entrepreneur, then try to be the best entrepreneur that you can be, right? Or if you are a singer, try to be the best singer that you can be, right? If you are an artist, right, try to be the best artist that you can be. If you are a sportsman, try to be the best sportsman that you can be. If you are a parent, try to be the best parent that you can be. If you are a father, mother, son, daughter, uncle, auntie, try to be the best father, mother, uncle, auntie, brother, sister, right? If you are a teacher, try to be the best teacher that you can be, right? So those things are excellence. Those are virtues, right? If you are a leader, try to be the best leader that you can be. Lead your people well. That's ethical. That's virtuous. And that is what Aristotle means by virtue or ethics, right? So those are like, you have to choose. I mean, those are something which you must like on your own, right? Become part of your nature to be virtuous, to be ethical, to exude and to exude not to exude excellence in all that you are, to exude excellence in all that you do, right? That is what ethics is. So here we see, like, again, I'm repeating myself, but nevertheless it is essential that you know this. Aristotle is showing us from the start that in politics, ethics is necessary, right? You cannot attain the purpose of politics, which is the good life, without ethics. And this is quite true, right? If you just look at the realities around the world, or realities of your own society, or the realities of the state in which you live. Because what Aristotle is saying is that the purpose of politics is to enable people to live a virtuous, ethical, moral, and hence a good life. And you can only attain those, and you can only ensure that your society, that people in your society are living an ethical, virtuous, moral, and hence a good life, only when the leaders themselves are also virtuous, right? When we say be virtuous, it does not only mean you, it does not only mean the people, right? It also means if you have a, it's like this, or how do I put this? If you have a good teacher, then the students are good, right? Like it says in the Holy Scripture or Bible, right? I think it says this. Oh, okay, yeah, I put religion, yeah, but what to do? For your own clarification, it says somewhere in the Bible that the tree is known by its fruit, right? By its fruits. So just like that, in other words, if you have a good teacher, then the students themselves will excel, right? So much in the same way. So replace the teacher with leaders and the students with the society, right? People in the society. So if you have a good leader, then if you have a good leader, then you have a good moral, ethical. If you have moral, ethical, and virtuous leaders, then you have by its very by its very virtue, then you have a good moral and virtuous citizens, or moral, ethical, and virtuous people, right, in your community. And if you have a good, so that's, in other words, it's a cyclical thing. You see, you cannot you can't assume that citizens or the people can be can be unethical and the leaders can be ethical. That's not the case. For Aristotle, it's more or less like a cyclical. In other words, he says, in order to have a good life, right? In order to have a good life, the leaders must be ethical, virtuous, right, and moral. But then, in order to have a good moral, ethical, and virtuous leaders, you also need to have a good moral and virtuous people, because ultimately the leaders will have to rise from the people, right? The leaders are not there always, right? They are not always there. I mean, somebody has to, the society has to bring them up, you see. So I hope you're getting my point now. So why politics is very part of you. The community in which you live in, the society in which you live in, if the society in which you live in, if most of the people are ethical and virtuous, right, and honorable, then you'll have virtuous, ethical, and moral leaders. And if you have good leaders, this in turn ensures that the continuity, right, the good society continues. However, if you don't have a good leader, if you don't have virtuous, ethical leaders, then it is also a sign that even the community themselves, even the people in the community, are not ethical or virtuous, right? This is one, like for instance, this is an interesting case, because if you look at it, for instance, because we are in India or because we are in Nagaland, let us just take the example of Nagaland, and an example very close to our home, right, to our hearts over here. So people in, like most people in Nagaland, tend to complain that the leaders are not good, that the leaders are not virtuous or ethical or not very moral. But the thing is, the people themselves in Nagaland are not very virtuous, are not very moral, or not very ethical. Hence, if the people in the community are themselves not moral and virtuous and ethical, then how can you have leaders who are good, leaders who are ethical or virtuous? Do you see the point? I hope you're getting the point here. You see, this is a two-way street. You can't expect good leaders if the society itself is not good. However, if you have a good society, then you have a good leader. And of course, if you have a good leader, that means that you have a good society, and hence it continues on. However, the problem is this. The problem is what happens when the society is not good and the leaders are not good. Then we are in a deep trouble, right? Then it is very difficult for any kind of society such as this to ever find a good leader, because you will find, but it will be very, very difficult. Not only difficult, but it may be quite improbable. Why? Because those who are actually capable will never get to be the leaders, right? Why? Because the society is itself very corrupt. So this tells you something about the society in which you live in. So much in the same way, even here in Nagaland, you may think of it as what I just mentioned, right? For instance, people in Nagaland think that leaders are not good. Okay, fine, leaders are not ethical, virtuous, I get it. But then, having an unethical, immoral leaders is a reflection of unethical, unvirtuous, and immoral people in the society, right? And because because leaders will have to come out, leaders will have to be picked from the society, right? Hence, you will never find good leaders. So hence, this is an example of Nagaland, right? So because people in Nagaland are not very virtuous and ethical, hence you will never have good leaders. And because we don't have good leaders, hence the society will always be corrupt. And hence the whole purpose of this political organization, political community called Nagaland will never achieve the purpose. Right? Will never achieve the purpose of politics. And that purpose is what? The good life. In giving good life, ensuring good life to the people. But that is not possible. Why? Because we don't have good leaders. We don't have ethical leaders or virtuous leaders. And because we don't have good and ethical, virtuous leaders, hence the society will never be free of corruption, will never be free of inequalities and all the injustice. So in other words, for Aristotle, you have politics. The politics is there. And the purpose of politics is to ensure the good life. Right? Is to ensure, for instance, is to make sure that you and I, people like you and me, right, that we lead the most ethical, virtuous and moral life, right, so that you and I are not forced to commit immoral or unethical act in order to survive, right, in order to earn a living bread, in order to earn a daily wage. We don't need to be corrupt. But if the condition of the society is such that you can only survive by being corrupt, by being unethical, then that is a reflection of the unethical leaders that you have, and also a reflection about how bad the people in the society is. Because if the people in the society is good, then you'll have a good leader, and hence the good life, hence the purpose of politics is fulfilled. However, if you have a bad leader, it's a reflection of the people, majority of the people in the society. And because majority of the people in society are corrupt, are unethical, hence you'll have unethical, corrupt leaders. And because you have corrupt and unethical leaders, hence you'll have a society which is corrupt, unethical, and where you will have to survive through unethical means. So there we go. So in other words, what Aristotle is saying is this, simply this. What is most essential is that it is not simply the fact that the leader. It's not simply the fact that if the society leaders see, the thing is this. Not only must the society, people in the society, persons or citizens of the society must be ethical, but also here's the thing. Here's the demand. The leaders, right? The leaders must be and must possess the most excellent virtues, the most excellent ethics, the most excellent moral virtues. In other words, what Aristotle is saying is that the standard of ethics and virtues is more the requirement of the leader to possess more ethics, more virtues, right? A higher degree of virtue, a higher magnitude of ethics is necessary, right? Maybe I am a virtuous person, then the leader must be 10 times virtuous than I am. You get the point? So that's what Aristotle is saying. In other words, if the citizen like you and me, if we are ethical, if we are ethical and virtuous, then the leaders we have must be 10 times, 20 times, 100 times more ethical, more virtuous than us. They must be the examples. They must be the symbol. They must be the insignia. They must be the quintessential example of morality, of ethics, of virtues, of excellence, right? So it's simply not enough that the people are ethical. The leaders must be ethical, virtuous. But however, the degree, the magnitude of ethics and virtues which those leaders must possess is incomparable with the virtues possessed by ordinary citizens like you and I. Right? That's why if you see, for instance, most developed countries, right? More like, for instance, if you look at, relatively speaking, right? I'm not speaking in terms of absolute terms. Relatively speaking, if you look at developing societies like India or developing society like Nagaland, right? And if you compare that with the Scandinavian countries such as Finland or Norway or Denmark or Sweden, you'll find that that those countries are more developed, they are more advanced, right? And hence you also find that their leaders, right, the politicians or the leaders, the politicians in Sweden or Denmark or in Norway, they are more, in terms relatively speaking, right, not absolute term, they are more virtuous than the leaders in India or leaders in Nagaland, right? And because the leaders are more virtuous in those Scandinavian countries, hence they are more progressive, right? The society is more progressive, advanced, right? But here in India and here in Nagaland, because we have, you know, not so ethical or not so virtuous politicians, or let's just say, let's be blunt, we have a horrible politicians and horrible leaders. Hence, look at the status of our society, right? We are like traditionally backward, right? We are still struggling to survive. We're still struggling to develop and progress. And not only that, the spirit of the people is what, like most of us, we survive through unethical means, right? So there you go. So there you have the example of a perfect example of what Aristotle speaks of, right? The relation between ethics and politics. So that's what you find, right? So this is the real life connection that makes politics more meaningful. You see, so ultimately we have to understand and we must realize that the ultimate purpose of politics is to ensure the good life for the citizens, and the good life or the happiness can only be attained through virtues or excellence, by displaying virtues and excellence in everything that we do. It requires virtues and excellence not only on the part of the citizens themselves, but also the leaders. And in fact, the leaders are demanded to be more virtuous, more ethical, more moral, and display a higher degree of excellence than its citizens, right? And if that is complete, if a society possesses a population of citizens who are ethical, virtuous, then definitely you'll have leaders who are likewise more virtuous and ethical and more moral. And because you have a good leaders, you have ethical, virtuous leaders, hence you will have a good society. A society where everyone leads a good life, and hence the purpose of politics is fulfilled. However, if that's not the case, then then there's something wrong with the society, or something wrong with the way the society is organized, and that is what we'll get to in the next video lecture. So he makes very clear. So Aristotle, makes it clear beyond the shadow of a doubt, right? He makes it clear beyond the shadow of a doubt about what the whole purpose of politics is, right? So the whole purpose of politics, right, is not just about attaining the good life, but also in reality what he tried to make his reader understand, or make his students understand, is that the whole purpose of politics is that we must regularly, we must try to attain the best. However, we can only attain the best if we know the kind of society in which we live in, right? The reality, the existing society, the kind of society that exists. In other words, that we have to greatly concern ourselves. We have to concern ourselves deeply with the existing reality, right? With the existing reality, where many society have imperfect regime, right? In other words, like actual regimes. And in reality, I suppose, you have so many communities, so many societies in the world, so many countries in the world. And I can be sure that none of the community, none of the state, none of the countries, they have good government. Not good government, but I'm sure that every sort of government in the world, they have some problems to deal with. They are imperfect, right? In terms of the perfection of what politics is supposed to be, what we get, we can talk about and Aristotle says, we can describe the perfect regime, the perfect government to attain the purpose of politics. But in reality, what we have is anything but the perfect. What we have in reality is the imperfect, right? Is the imperfect government, is the imperfect sort of organizing and arranging of political communities, which he calls constitution, right? But But for Aristotle, by constitution, he does not mean the constitution that we think of today. By constitution, it only means how the society is organized, right? How the society is organized and how the offices of rule, right? How the government offices are distributed, or how they are distributed among various sections of the population. In other words, how the society is organized ultimately. So he says there's a purpose. Politics has a purpose, and we can describe the perfect political regime. However, the reality is that none of the regime in the world is perfect, right? But the question is this: how do we try to make the best out of what we have? And this is where Aristotle becomes even more practical than Socrates, and Plato, right? Plato and Socrates, they are big political thinkers, political philosophers, no doubt. However, in terms of practicality, Aristotle is more practical. He has his own vision of the perfect political regime, what politics is supposed to be, how political society, how political community ought to be organized. However, he's also aware of the fact that in real life, in the world, in real life, the perfect political regime is not possible, right? So the question now becomes, if the perfect political regime is not possible here on earth, then that means we should just give up. The answer is no, right? According to Aristotle, the answer is no. For Aristotle, instead of just giving up, there's a way, and that way is what? And for him, the way is that even though the existing regime in the world may be imperfect, we can try to arrange the society in such a manner that we can get the best, right? We can get the best out of what we have. We can do something good from what we have. We can salvage something. We can save something from what we have. Even though, for instance, Nagaland, right? Even though the society may be extremely corrupt, majority of the people may be forced to make their living out of unethical means, and most of our leaders are unethical and unvirtuous. However, given the unique circumstances of each society, we can salvage something. We can create something out of this chaos, right? And that's what politics is all about. That's the practicality of Aristotle, and that is what we will start and discuss. That is what we'll discuss in the next lecture, right? Where we'll go more in depth into what he meant by what he calls into the various kinds of political organizations in practical terms. Alright, thank you, and I'll see you soon in the next video lecture. Thank you so much.